Welcome to Journals of Self-Discovery. Hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. It's actually been November since I posted an interview, but I think you'll find this month's episode was worth the wait. There's a couple of announcements that I have before we begin. First, I wanted to let you know that Bob Ferguson and Tess Hughes are having a one-day event in London in May. I consider both of them to be worthwhile teachers as well as personal friends, so I definitely recommend that event. To find out more, you can visit couk.wordpress.com. And I'll say that again. It's tatcouk.wordpress.com. And I'll also put a link to that in the show notes for this particular podcast if you want to check that out. Also, thanks to Tess and her community of seekers, I'll actually be in Ireland leading a weekend retreat, and that's April the 20th through the 22nd. You can find more about that at tesshughes.com, TESSHUGHES.com, under the Events tab. So my guest this month is Jerry Wennstrom. He's not a guest I would have even heard of, much less chosen to interview, so I'm thankful for a listener's suggestion. Jerry is an artist who I would say found the higher self, or God, or the mystery, or whatever you want to call it, found that as the source of creativity. And I wanted to read just an excerpt from his book, which I highly recommend. It's called The Inspired Heart, An Artist's Journey of Transformation. And I think this little excerpt is about the best summary I can give of this interview. Most artists believe, however unconsciously, that they can create their way to heaven. This is a good and noble ambition, but impossible to achieve. Paradoxically, to do anything less than to try to create a heaven on earth is to waste a perfectly good life. The belief that we can do what has never been done moves hope into action. Forces larger than our efforts can accomplish our dream, but we cannot avoid the moment of failure in which we must rely on those forces. Our innocent, passionate belief in the possibilities inherent in this world, in spite of our apparent human limitations, lets God know we mean business. Great art comes out of this quest. Yet, it is not enough to simply know this truth. Many scholars can speak eloquently on this subject, and in a sense they know about this truth. But only in the moment of real surrender, a moment when that which is known no longer holds, are we given the pure, simple experience of the arrival of something holy, which is ancient and yet truly new, in the best and most inspired sense of the word. To go beyond the limits of human effort through surrender is to go beyond death. So I hope you enjoy this month's episode, and again, check out the show notes, which you can find those at spiritualteachers.org/podcast, and that will give you some of the highlights from this episode and links to some of the resources that Jerry mentions. I think that one thing people might be surprised by or want to know more about is basically that my podcast, my website focuses on spiritual teachers, and I was just really surprised by and thought, wow, this guy is an artist, yet he speaks like so many spiritual teachers that I know and people that I have interviewed. If perhaps you could speak a little bit about that in terms of what you see as the overlap, or perhaps you find the artistic path and the spiritual path identical to one another.
Well, I think anything we do with all of our heart and soul becomes a spiritual endeavor in spite of ourselves. So there's no separation. Whatever if we're a business person or a house husband or wife, I think what we do with, absolute intent and passion will arrive somewhere that we, for one thing, didn't expect, and the other into a kind of metaphorical death rebirth, because I think we all start out doing what we think we can do, and often what's never been done, and yet there's some kind of holy defeat that kicks in, and then that's where the real work comes in and the real transformation happens. So art is a spiritual path, but so is being a dentist, doctor, lawyer, Indian chief.
So many people have careers and jobs and so forth, yet I don't think that they would think of those things as a spiritual path in any way. So the difference is doing it with all of your heart. I believe that was the phrase that you used.
Yes. Well, there's an element.
They're doing it with passion.
Yes. There's an element of complete passionate involvement in whatever we do for that to happen. I don't think it comes out of mediocrity. There's a great story, I think it was Ramakrishna, where when a disciple of his came and kept saying, well, how do I find God? How do I find God? And he takes him and he puts his head underwater and holds it, and the guy comes up gasping for air, and he says, when you want God as badly as you wanted air, you will find God. So I think we all start out doing something that we believe in, but if we really take it to the bone, there's something there that is larger. And, we may think, I never imagined as an artist that it would take me where it did. I don't know if you know my story, but I ended up destroying all my work and giving everything I owned away and living like a monk for the next 15 years. But I never imagined the path in art and creation would take me to that place. But in retrospect, it makes complete sense.
How did you get into, if you will, art? How did that, is that something you were interested in as a child, or how did that develop?
Well, it was the one thing I could do. I grew up in a poor, mostly black neighborhood where we were the minority, and I didn't do well in school. I didn't even go half the time, and even in high school I would check out in my Norton motorcycle and disappear. And I think art was the one thing the world said, what a good boy are you, because I could do it. So I think when you don't know who you are, which I did not, then you latch on to any identity you can, and that just became that for me. It became the thing I was. In a sense, a false God as well, I think, hence the ultimate letting it all go. I think like I said, we all start out thinking we can do what's never been done, and yet, it is in the defeat that the work begins. And, I think if we can be with that sense of we're no longer running the show and we're no longer in control of what we think we're creating, that's where the gods kick in, and that's where the real work can really unfold in a way that's larger than our will, intelligence, and good intentions.
I'm reminded of myself. I wanted to be a college professor in agriculture, of all things. I guess I didn't understand at the time what was driving that. I don't know if maybe that relates to what you mean about how you didn't know yourself. You didn't know who you are. I didn't understand the longings, if you will, or the forces that were driving me towards that particular career. It wasn't until much later that I began to understand that it was actually a love of the outdoors or a love of nature that was at the root of that, and it really didn't have anything to do with this image of being a college professor.
Yeah, well, I think a dream is important, however, ultimately misguided it may have turned out to be. It's important to have something that we believe in and to give ourselves to it. Maybe you have become a different kind of professor in a different realm too. What is a professor? Someone who, disseminates wisdom and information, and maybe you are a different kind of professor, more of a spiritual professor, but I think it never quite turns out the way we imagine, and if it does, it's usually a pretty boring life because it's too controlled and strategic, and there's no magic left in it.
Right. So that process of destroying your art, that's not something that just came upon you one evening, I'm imagining, and the next day you acted upon it. Was that a conviction, if you will, that grew upon you over time?
Well, in a sense, one of my overused phrases is the gods whisper before they scream. And there were many whispers along the way. There were things happening. I was extremely driven. I couldn't have produced more than I did. I've often said if I could have painted my way to heaven, I would have done it because I tried hard enough. And yet, there was beginning. You can only take your dream so far before you have to. There's an element of the sort of quantum leap that needs to happen, and when we come up against that, we can really feel lost, like the way all that will and drive and everything that was moving my life early on no longer worked, and it felt dead, and it felt like, okay, I've done this as much as I could, and what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's just more stuff and creating more stuff. So it starts out pretty well intended, but I think that's the beginning where something larger begins to stir, and there were whispers that were sort of pointing in that direction. Because if you think about it, the core of creation is to inhabit the void and to be so available in that void that reality unfolds, and you are a willing participant in all of it, and your input counts for a lot, but also it's very much in the moment with what is emerging in the spirit of the time. So, creation, ultimate creation, was stirring in a sense of living into that void rather than hiding, or sort of in the laboratory of the studio, where a painting becomes like a prescribed void that's a safe little container where where you enter that void and you might get inspired and something new will come out of it. What would it mean to do that with your whole life? And I think that was beginning to stir, and it was scaring the hell out of me too, because I didn't know what that meant. I just knew that there was something alive, more alive than I had known, and it was drawing me forward, but it was also scaring me. So I think, there were whispers along the way. It didn't happen overnight, but when I knew what I had to do, it was immediate, and I did it.
Why you? Why amongst, I don't know how many other people were in your circle at that time, but was it that you were pushing yourself, do you think, harder than others perhaps, or more passionate, or more truthful about the artist that you wanted to be? Why did you come to this place and so many others didn't?
Well, I think because it was my particular false god, my art and my identity with it. I don't know what other people need to do, and I wouldn't say everyone has to do what I did. I just think in whatever it is we have given ourselves to, if we will come to a place where we may feel lost in our accomplishment, and that accomplishment could be extremely impressive. I had an enormous body of work, and yet it was feeling all very dead to me. So I don't know why me. I just know it made sense with the way I was living my life, with my level of courage, whatever was there. I think everything just lined up with exactly who I was, which is the way I think it works for everybody in a different form. I don't think we can copy anyone's spiritual path. I'm not even sure it's all that useful to be pursuing great teachers. I think it is, in terms of we can get a sense of what it might take to really truly live our own individuality. But it's a very lonely business, and there's no duplicating it. There's no one who can say what's real and what's not real. All we can know in our heart of hearts is our own reality and what we need to do, and it takes enormous courage to be able to do it for all of us. It's like individuality. We all want to be individuals, but truly, what we are called to do as individuals is probably one of the most terrifying of all possibilities. We all want to be something recognizable, and have some reference point in the world that can say, I am that. What happens when that fails? Who are we? What's true individuality? It's our one-on-one relationship with the mystery, and there is no reference point.
I guess you would say, for myself, I saw the false god, if you will, in the career that I happened to be pursuing at that time. But then I latched on to a spiritual path, as in another way, a way to build a self or build an identity as a person who's seeking truth or seeking enlightenment. And it very much resonates with me that what you said about, it comes to a point where, that too is seen as a false god. And then what are you left with? And how do you have the courage to give that up? I guess that's... You talk, in the interviews I've heard, you talk a lot about surrender. I think you said the ability to trust surrender is the way that you phrased it at one point. Is that something that we can get better at or practice in some way when that moment comes, rather than turning away from it?
Well, we could practice, we could try, but I think it's not real until it is. Surrender isn't an option when we're faced with what feels like some kind of ultimate demise, metaphorically. I suppose it could be physically too, but I think ultimately when we come up against, when the gods make us an offer we can't refuse, that's when surrender becomes real. And I don't think anyone necessarily, even with the best of intentions, can give themselves to ultimate surrender of the ego until that ego begins to fail them. And so, I think it's very important to be around high-minded people who are making some attempt at understanding and self-realization. But in the end, again, it gets down to that lonely business where we know that there's no choice. It becomes this sort of choiceless choice. And we can't create that moment. We can ask for it, we can call on it, but it's a terrifying privilege to have it laid on us. I didn't choose the path I did. I just knew it was life. It was the most alive, titillating thing that I could intuitively sense was in front of me. And I had no idea how to get to it or what to do with it. All I knew is everything else was dying and that was alive. So what kind of a choice is that? I think we can choose to live a frightened small life, which many of us do. But it seems like it's a choice that, it's a choice that's not going to serve anything. It makes our lives, it's like a living death. If we want life, we have to go for it. And when that life comes, we often don't get another chance at it. I love the whole idea of Saturn return. I don't know if you know, my wife is into astrology, talks about it. But it's sort of a place where, like we're talking about, the place where things begin, we start to question everything, and we have to go through, and everything begins to feel like death, and that's the place where the renewal can begin. But it often happens for most of us at the age of 30. Even if you look at many of the great teachers, it happens around that age. What we think is life, and it's more like fear of death. I think real life can only come out of turning into our boogeyman. And it's different for all of us. I mean, death isn't death. It's just death is just our idea of what we would be without our identity. And so in a sense, death is the death of our identity, the death of our ego. So as I see it, is the only game in town. It's not about death, it's about real life.
Yeah, I've noticed in some of your artwork that I've seen online that there are layers. It seems like there's always layers, and you're peeling back layers and revealing something else. And I know there's often a passing through of a layer that looks like death in your artwork.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I'm doing something different now. I've actually been doing more public art, which is kind of interesting and fun. But yeah, the earlier the box things, they're very coffin-like, and but it's sort of like what we're talking about. You're faced with something that's a little scary and looks like death, and yet when you interact with it, it does whimsical things, or it will deliver a gift, or you can, it does things that were unexpected. It gives you something that you didn't expect. So I think, I didn't like plan this as an art form, but I think, who we are, it just comes out of our pores. Whatever we're creating, if we're just doing our children and trying to help them grow, they cannot be anything more or less than we are, and it's up to them to take it further. So who we are will come out in our attention and in our creation. And that's certainly the case for me.
After you destroyed your work, you mentioned, I think you mentioned, was it a number of years before you started doing any artwork again?
Yes, many years. I mean, I live on Whidbey Island, Washington now. And I destroyed my work in 1979. I came here in 1988, and I didn't start doing art until probably about 89 or 90. So there were many years. I didn't think I'd ever go back, but I was good at it, so why not? I mean, I like to do it, and it's what, and I've created a whole new body of work. I think when it no longer matters, it's okay. When it was such an identity, when it was everything I thought I was, it became too unhealthy. I think now I do it because it doesn't matter, and so there's a freedom in it, and there's in that kind of detachment, a lot of mystery comes through because you're just simply available, and that is sort of emerging spirit of the day, which art at its best brings through. That can come through our detachment more than through our attachment to who we think we are. I mean, when we have ideas of ourselves, we just create ideas of art. When we are living that mystery ourselves, we are open to that mystery in our creation, whatever it is.
So what, if you don't mind my asking, what did you do for all those years after that, after destroying your art?
Well, that's what my book's about, because, of course, everyone wants to know that. And that's where, when I was asked, a publisher approached, and Parabola magazine had done a film about me, and a publisher asked if I wanted to write a book, and so I just downloaded. I just wanted, because I was so tired of my own story, I was able to just write my book in 4 months, and that's the story. I gave all my money away. I never asked anyone for anything. I hardly touched money. I ate when I had food. I fasted when I didn't. So I just did the moment. I did what each moment gave. There were times when I was absolutely out on the street, not knowing where I was going, but I've never spent a single night on the street. All I know is that when I gave myself to that void, I never could have lived the strange and often terrifying life that I did if there wasn't some mystery in place. And I think the gods meet us halfway. When we give it all, I think we can trust completely. And that's what I needed to know. I was tired of my own strategy, my own manipulation, my own good intention, my own, ideas of myself. I needed to know there was something more alive and more conscious than my puny little world. And that's what I had to find out, and that's what in fact I did find out. There is something that carries our lives so much better than we do. And now I'm in the world because, again, it's like art, because it doesn't matter. I mean, I got married when I was 44. I was celibate for many years. I mean, I'm in the world in a way because, like art, it doesn't matter. And I fully enjoy it. It's a whole lot more fun than living the life that I lived when I had given it all up. I mean, there it was like learning to dance. It was so intense at times and so scary and so incredibly blissful at times when this miraculous sort of salvation would come out of the blue when I thought I was just going to die. And now in some sense, it's all way more covert because I look living a completely normal life with my beautiful wife and my beautiful house in the woods. And yet, underneath it all, it's the structure, the bones of this facade is what I learned at that time when I let it all go. I still live in that way, but it's all become much more of a dance rather than having to learn to dance, kicking and screaming all the way.
Would you call that a discipline, if you will, that you were practicing during those years of trying to live that way?
Discipline failed me. I wouldn't call it a discipline. I would call it a determination to stay present with what was. Especially when I gave up everything. That was all I had. If I failed to meet the moment in the way necessary, my life depended on it. It wasn't like having a bank account, going home and crying in your beer if things went wrong. My life was on the line constantly. So there aren't a lot of options in that. There's a fierce determination to stay present. Discipline is a good idea if you have an indulgent life, to get out of it once in a while and do something more disciplined. And and it takes discipline even now to get out of bed and go down to the studio and create something. But it's not, I don't take it so seriously. I mean, of course discipline matters, especially if we're living too insipidly, if that's a word. But I think for the most part, what we're talking about is beyond discipline. It's fierce determination to trust and be present with exactly what is, because you can't improve on it. Nothing improves. Discipline does not improve on that kind of fierce presence with what is in your life at each given moment. And it's the same with human beings who enter my life. I mean, when people, a lot of people come here. We have a dormitory. Many people come and stay with us. And I never know what's going to come out of a thing. All I know is if I can be present enough with another human being, it's always miraculous what comes out of it. And I'm as surprised as anyone else. And you can't go in with an idea of yourself or of what somebody might need or want that it's going to work out that way. All you can do is go in as unknowing as I have described, walking into that void. You have to go into it unknowing, with attention, and almost turning it into a kind of embodied prayer where you're asking for the miraculous to come through in another encounter with another human being. And that's where it happens. And every time I go into it shaking in my boots, not knowing, and every time I'm bowled over by what happens at times. And the only thing that gets in the way is me, nothing else.
Mm-hmm. I can relate to a degree with the one-on-one, what you're talking about, but I have to admit that what I'm imagining as waking up for myself, waking up in the morning and just seeing what happens versus planning out my day and knowing that I'm going to make a call at this time, I'm going to go to the store at this time, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. That's a leap.
It's okay to do your chop wood, carry water plan, go to the supermarket. But I think what I'm talking about is always watching for the miraculous, watching for what the moment's really about. Looking at the girl behind the counter, putting your groceries in a bag and being attentive in a way that sees her tears under her smile and touching that person in a way that makes that moment different for that person or whatever. It's like it's not like we can't plan, that we can't do our daily chores. It's that we have to do it with a kind of dual attention. We have two eyes. One eye, it's okay to look at the world and work it as good as best you can. The other eye, to be watching for that mystery to reveal itself in a form that is completely unexpected at times.
I appreciate that. I can get a feel for that in my life. How would you describe what goes on when you're in the studio today? Do you have a set studio time, or do you just go whenever you feel the urge to go?
For the most part, I go when I feel the urge. Sometimes it's not at all fun going to the studio, especially when I'm beginning something new. And I often begin something new because I'm bored, or I feel like, I'm just too embodied and I need to get into another dimension. So, at those times it's like pulling teeth. I force myself to the studio. But once things get rolling, it's like, you jump out of bed and you go and you just hook right into the mystery of what's unfolding. And, there are surprises, and so it's always both. It takes something to get moving, but I think it's most important that, what is the thing that is most exciting for us in our heart? Where is life, and how do we move towards that life? I know that in creation is that life is in that. And it doesn't necessarily mean just making things. It could be, like I said, with another human being. Like the creative moment would be making a leap in a conversation, or a leap in, being present with someone in a way that even you don't expect. Like I had a woman come here. She actually came out from Seattle to the island to interview me. She had a radio show. And, I've done enough radio, and that I kind of know what it takes, and I get all geared up when I have to, and so I was, I was sort of all just, the trajectory was interview. And so, there's a knock on my door, and the woman arrives, and I open the door, and all I could feel coming from, I didn't even know where it was coming from, all I could feel was pain in this woman. And I opened the door, I welcomed her in, and she came and sat down, and I made her tea, and all I could be was silent. And it was like survival. And whenever I tried to come out, and the quieter I got, because it was the only thing I could do, the crazier she got, and it got more and more intense, and finally I just kept going deeper within and just holding the space, not knowing what was going on. This was supposed to be about a radio interview. And at one point I felt the shift, and I looked up and she was crying. And what she said, which I don't know why she said it, but she says, "No one has ever done that to me before." And I didn't do anything. All I did was the only thing I could do in that moment. And it turned out that she was just diagnosed with cancer, and it was supposedly terminal, and she was just terrified. And so that it all just shifted. So here's the whole idea of an interview turns into a non-interview about silence, which was what the moment needed more than anything. It's certainly what she needed. So she ended up spending the night. Like I said, we have a dormitory, and I made her dinner, and we had a great interview the next day. But that's a good example of how the mystery comes through the door in ways that has nothing to do with what we think it's about. But it took an interesting kind of, I don't know what else to call it, but courage to maintain that kind of silence in that pain, in that darkness, because you start to wonder, is it me? What is going on here? And I don't know. I did not know. All I know is when it shifted and I looked up and she was crying, that all the doors opened, and then I could be there for her.
I've done a lot of meditation over the years and am very familiar with watching thoughts and trying to figure out where are thoughts coming from. That was an early question of mine in regards to identity or self-identity. It was, where do these thoughts of myself or this feeling of myself, where do those originate? A lot of attention was placed on that. And at some point in time, I saw what I would describe as this creative expression, if you will, was coming from that same place as thought, as worded thought, that it was all originating from the same place. And I'm wondering, you mentioned about one eye, if you will, being turned back while another eye was facing the outside world. If that's kind of your experience in the process of creation, is a watching or a waiting for something to bubble up inside.
Yes, and in invoking it, I think an ongoing living conversation with the mystery is important in whatever form. I mean, you can call it prayer, you can call it meditation, you can call it ritual. I mean, you can do whole rituals around it, which my wife does a lot of. But I think if we're not talking to the gods, we're talking to ourselves. And so I think when we know we don't know, when we know that if I do my most intelligent, brilliant idea in art, it's going to be boring. But if I can stay open and not know, and be very determined to respond to what's coming through in a way that's larger than my own little circle mind loop, that's where the real stuff happens. And so how do we do that? I don't know. I think intent counts for a lot. And I think keeping that conversation open. I mean, how often do we ask for inspiration? How often do we get stuck with something and just call on our angels, call on our gods, call on our goddesses? How often do we do that? You see, that can be a living conversation, and nobody has to know about it. It's not like we have to go around like some kind of, holy person. I think it's between us and our own mystery, and I think keeping that conversation alive and open in all forms. It's like, what I described with that woman who came out to interview me. I mean, believe me, I was calling on the gods for help because it was an extremely uncomfortable moment, and I didn't understand my own silence even. And yet it came through because I stayed present in the discomfort. That's what alchemy is about. I mean, alchemy is about these dueling tensions, and then the third entity emerges. If we can hold that tension, that discomfort, and it's the same with art, but it's the same with everything that ultimately is inspired. We have to be able to hold all of that, and there's some admission of defeat in it because we can't just do anything we want. We have to hold the discomfort and but do it consciously. I mean, when you look at somebody who is running from their pain, that's somebody who can't hold their discomfort. I mean, that's why we shopaholic, we're alcoholic, we're, addicted to food or drugs or everything else, because we can't hold our own discomfort, which it just comes with the territory of being a human being. These dueling things within us, that whole duality is constant. And when it gets at the cycle, in the place in the cycle where it is most intense and most difficult, that's where most of us bail, or we just want something to fill it, whatever it is, whether it's TV or whatever it is. But in learning to hold that discomfort consciously with the intent of allowing something larger to emerge, I think that is the most creative thing that we can do as human beings. And there's not a lot of control. You don't control the outcome or what you want. You control yourself enough to stay out of the way of what's wanting to come through. That's a very different animal.
I had a friend who just killed himself this week, and I've been thinking a lot about that, and that I don't even know how to say it, but that inability, if you will, to face that discomfort, and to look towards something else as a solution to that discomfort. I mean, clearly he was in a very bad place, and and it seems like we have very little skill in learning how to do that. And I think part of what I'm always grasping for is how can we learn how to do that better? How can we train ourselves to live in that discomfort, or live in that unknowing, or really look at what is bothering us versus hiding from it?
Suicide is the avoidance of death in a certain sense. It's the avoidance of a metaphorical ego death. It can be, rather than give ourselves to the transformational qualities of metaphorical death. I mean, we would rather destroy our body than, many of us will, rather than hold that discomfort long enough to allow it to transform us, and give ourselves to that. It's in some way, it's like, I think I know I have been on that edge myself in my own struggle. And somehow suicide could, I know in my own mind would almost justify the fact that there is no mystery, there is no God. You see, all there is death, and here I am, I'm giving myself to it. When in fact, the transformational quality that's in the difficulty of that experience, I think that the place where we're on that kind of an edge, and it's not, we don't have to literally be suicidal, but the place where everything is failing us so miserably. I at this point in my life, I'm always looking again out of those two eyes, where one, it looks like all is lost here. Everything's going wrong. Nothing's working. Conversation isn't working. Relationships aren't working. Nothing is working out of the one eye. Out of the other eye, at this point, having faced my own boogeymen in the best way I could, out of that other eye, there's excitement. So as dark as it gets, there's also the most exciting place, because I know that's where it's at. That's where the magic happens. And how can we, without that sensibility, suicide is the only option, because it looks like it's all is lost anyway, so why not just name the beast and, go kill ourselves? Because we don't have a sense that this is where the magic happens. And I think we all need to learn more of that, and I don't know anything about your friend. I just know from confronting my own darkness that I see the appeal of something like that. If you don't have a sense that that's the transformational potential of that moment, and it is about holding extreme discomfort at times. It almost always is.
I feel sometimes, at least, people get into the spiritual search, or the spiritual search becomes another way to avoid discomfort, really.
It can.
To avoid
anything could be.
Negative thoughts.
It can be.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about when we have confronted our own metaphorical death in whatever form, we can, what we bring back to the world is the ability to do that for others, because it's going to come at us in one form or another. Everyone is going to project their limitations onto us, and most of us get angry, or we bounce off it, or we defend ourselves, or we do something about it that gets it away from us, because it's the same thing that we're struggling with, and we don't want it in our face because it's us that we're seeing. But once we've confronted our own metaphorical death, we can transform that moment for other people. And it's not like we do it like some kind of guru or some kind of teacher. It's like we do it because it's coming at us. We hold the discomfort and we allow it to transform. You know, my younger brother died a few years ago. And there was there was a moment where, you know, my younger brother was very handsome, and he was charming, and, you know, he always had lots of girlfriends, and so his life was pretty. He lived, you know, a lot on the surface for the most part, because life was easy, the doors opened, and you know, we didn't necessarily relate a lot. We didn't have a lot to communicate, basically, because we were living such different lives. But at his death, I think at some level he sensed something. We became closer and closer. And at one point, when he was right on the edge, he called. And I just really got a hit from our conversation that he couldn't go back to life and he couldn't die. He just seemed really stuck. And so it was a moment where I was so uncomfortable. I didn't, you know, what do you do for someone who's on that edge? Especially when you love them, when they're depending on you for something that you don't know what to give. And so first what it turned into is me turning in to my own fear of death. And I just went into myself and I realized what am I afraid of here? I was afraid of naming it by putting it out. And I basically said, Jack, you are dying. That's all you have to do right now. I was just shooting from the hip from there. I was just, you know, I was saying things. I said, you know, you've done it so beautifully. You've been a good example. And I was just saying, but he just burst out crying, and he was able to die the next day. But, you know, a moment like that, there is no way I could have given myself, because I had to go through a kind of death myself. The death of a nice guy who wanted to say something positive to my dying brother. I had to die of that in order to name the beast, and we both had to enter that death in a funny kind of a way, where we name it. And so it was as shocking to me as it was to him, and we both ended up in tears, closer than I have ever been with him in my life. And you cannot do that if you don't know it within yourself, that death and the renewal that comes out of it. All I know is that renewal happened for my brother in whatever form. It gave him what he needed to do, which was to die at that time. Who knows what happens after that? I have no idea, but I know that was a healing moment because he was able to do what he had to do, and he couldn't before.
Almost any time that I say something that's really true, it feels like a death.
Yes.
Because some part of me I'm exposing something that I would rather not do, and it feels like dying.
Yes. I think any inspired thing it's gonna knock our ego right off its pedestal, you know, and that goes for all of us. I can almost feel when it happens. My heart starts beating, and it's like, oh, what am I gonna say now?
Yeah.
Well, that's open to the moment. That's open to the mystery. So congratulations on that, because I think that's as good as it gets. If you think you're going to be a little spiritual teacher and put your wisdom in your pocket and take it to the bank, it's never going to happen. You know, you have to be as terrified as anyone, and just stand in that terror and that possibility for inspiration to come through.
Yeah. And just in terms of everyday activity, you know, like making dinner or brushing your teeth, do you see a similar feeling, if you will, to in those acts as in the being in the studio?
Well, potentially. It's like being in the studio is no different. I mean, sometimes I just don't really, I might get a lot of grunt work done, but I don't arrive at inspiration. I think it's a constant, you stalk it. You stalk the possibility. Like you're doing that sort of watchfulness. And it's not, I think it's it's like a habit. Most of us are in the habit of indulging ourselves, avoiding things, or looking after number one, or seeking advantage. And, that's our habit. It's just a habit. After a while, what you're asking, it's a different habit. I have the habit of doing what I do, which I love being in the world. I do all the cooking. I'm always the first one to go and do what needs doing because I love doing things. And yet, my habit at this point in life is that I do it all with a kind of watchfulness. And I don't have to think about it. It's just become the habit of who I am.
What you referred to as the holy defeat, this was probably one of your interviews, the holy defeat. It sounded almost like a touchstone, if you will, that once that had happened to a person, they would have the memory of that as sort of
yes,
a ground of truth, maybe would be a phrase for it throughout their life.
Yeah. Yes. Well, because what comes, I know with everything I thought I was doing, even when I destroyed my work and everything, I'd given everything up, I still felt like I couldn't break through to the place that I sensed was calling in a certain sense. But I have to say, something happened which I realized. For one thing, I identified it as a very feminine energy, a very feminine. I mean, Yogananda says you have God the Father, God the Mother, and God the Father is very demanding, and you'll never please God the Father. God the Mother loves you no matter what. And I felt like as much as I had given, as much as I tried, I still failed. Therein lies the holy defeat. But what came through was God the Mother. That something happened that really opened the door. And I can't say a whole lot more than that about it, but I know it was feminine. I know I didn't deserve it. I know it was grace, and I know I can count on it. Not count on it because what a good boy am I. I'm smart now. I'm wise now. I can count on it because it came through like a promise, and that promise cannot be defeated. And even in literal death, and who knows, like I said earlier, what happens there, I trust that arrival. I trust that it will come. It never comes the way I think. It never comes when I want it. It comes when I need it, and it knows better than me. And I think, the whole Christian notion of eternity, the eternal, until you die, it's a Christian thing, until you die and are reborn, you don't experience eternal life. And that I know is a truth, not because, of any religion, but because if you can really go through that death, that holy defeat that you referenced, and allow yourself to be defeated in that wrestle with control over the mystery, that what comes through will always come through. When that grace comes through, you can count on it. And it makes life worth living because we don't have to be afraid. We don't have to always be strategizing on how we can protect myself, or how I'm going to have enough money, or how I'm going to have enough friends, or how I'm going to please the right people. We know that death is going to keep coming around. We know that those holy defeats are going to keep coming. But what we now know is that in it is our renewal, is our salvation. And that's not a religious thing. It's a fact of the mystery. It's a promise, and it's bedrock. Nothing else is. There's nothing else that's going to give us security. All the things we try, enough money, enough sex, enough drugs, enough whatever it is we think is going to give it to us, it will never do it. That promise will do it, and it looks more like death and defeat than it does like accomplishment. But there's no greater accomplishment.
Do you, we've talked about metaphorical death, and you alluded to literal death. Do you have any sense of life after death, or what that's like, or what happens to a person?
Oh, I don't. I've certainly read a lot. I love some of the things. I love the whole Tibetan Book of the Dead. The stories in my book are about those encounters where all seemed lost. I walked into the worst case scenario, and each of the stories in my book are about that transformation, that salvation that came when all was lost. All I know about literal death is that I couldn't find it in life, and I don't believe it will happen in death, physical death. Because it didn't happen in life, it will not happen in death. Of course the body's going to die, of course all of that. But I can't believe that there's not something we're going to get launched into that isn't greater than where we were standing at the moment of our death. I don't know what it is. I have no idea. I love some of what I read about it, but I don't think anybody else knows necessarily either. My guess is the Tibetans probably know a bit more than most of us, and I love some of their ideas. But who knows? I do not have a sense of what it will be. I only have a sense that it is.
I heard something that David White had said about you, and he said, to quote him, he has claimed his happiness in existence, which I thought was a rather remarkable claim. Are you happy? Just on an everyday kind of way of thinking about that? Or is your day-to-day life happy, or how's that changed for you, or has it changed at all?
Well, it's like I said, you can't really be alive until your boogeymen are no longer running behind you, So happy, happy. I think I think I can't take my unhappiness seriously like I used to. I can't get to the edge of suicide anymore, because I get excited by what I know is in the darkness I might be feeling. I can't say I'm happy all the time like a Pepsi generation kind of happy where I'm always, but I think I'm as happy as a human being can get because I can't believe in the darkness anymore. I know it's not real. As much as I even try, sometimes it's wonderfully self-indulgent to feel sorry for yourself when things are going wrong, but I can't help laughing at myself when I take it too seriously. So happy means you can't take darkness too seriously anymore. It's not like I don't try, like every bozo on the planet, to be self-indulgent in my difficulty at times, but, I think I'm as happy as anybody can possibly be in this embodied life where we're going to suffer. There's no question. You can't be happy in suffering, but I think you can know that in the hardest part of it is the place that's most exciting too. What do you do with that paradox? I think when we don't have that is when we're unhappy people. When we avoid it, we're unhappy because we're running after everything that looks like it's going to get us out of that, and that is a very unhappy life. Even though we look like the happiest people in the world, we're just running from ourselves.
Can you speak a little more about, you mentioned the feminine, the masculine and feminine energy. You said that in another interview, I believe you said you maxed out the masculine aspect, and I think you were referring to your early years as an artist and that drive or that push.
Yeah, trying to please the masculine god for sure. Well, again, it gets back to the holy defeat. The possible demands of the body, of the will, of intelligence, of good intentions, that's all very masculine driven stuff that we think is going to We have to try our hardest. We almost have to. So how do you describe maxing that out? Like I said about painting, if I could have painted my way to heaven, I would have done it because I tried hard enough, and I didn't do it. It came in the defeat. It came in the letting go. It came in the re-entry into the feminine, into the void, into the unknowing, into those black holes in space that look like nothing, and yet they can consume or produce a star. It took the feminine to bring that through, not the masculine. But you have to come to terms with the masculine. I think we can't be lazy. We can't say, oh well, either like with a lot of what I'm saying here now. So it's like in some way somebody can say, well then why bother? Because everything I'm saying is it's not going to work. Nothing works anyway. But you have to try because there is a relentless God the Father, you might say, that is going to demand the best of us. And if we haven't given our best, we will never know that it doesn't work. If we just do what we do half-heartedly, then that's who we become. We become a half-hearted human being. I think we have to do both of those to the max. Now, and the gift of the feminine, it's like Lao Tzu says, know the male, be the female. I think in the end, the gift of the feminine is that we become more like the feminine, more receptive, more that ability to give and forgive and to realize the limitations of human, more compassion, more holding space for people rather than filling it with our masculinity.
I can hear someone saying to themselves, that Jerry guy, he said I got to try really hard. I got to max this out. Is there some way I can max this out as fast as possible? And then I'll get into that feminine part that he was talking about, because that'll just show up. You see what I'm getting at? How, at least in the spiritual world, if you will, the world of spiritual seeker, I feel like we're always trying to game the system in some way. We're always looking for a shortcut. We're always looking for, the quickest path to enlightenment, or the quickest path to the holy defeat, if you will. In a certain sense, we're chasing death and trying to find, how can I get to that point of, I'm there. I'm facing the death of all that I know that I am. How can I accelerate that? And does that resonate in any way, or make any sense to you, or just sound ridiculous?
Well, I don't think anyone should necessarily ask for death. I think pursuing life, Lao Tzu says a journey of 1,000 miles begins where your feet are. I think we're all in the best seat in the house, and we need to pay attention there. And exactly what we're challenged with is the place where we can grow. I don't know that there's any fast route. I think it's very important, again, that conversation with the mystery. Are we asking for real transformation, or do we want to just hang out in some crunchy granola, nice meditation room where everybody's smiling blissfully? Do we really want the goodies of awakening for ourselves, which is our birthright? It's not like something special. It's who we are. It's what we're here to become. Are we asking for that, and are we willing to do what it takes to get there? I think that's very important to ask for it, and very important to have the courage to meet it when we are confronted with it, because it won't come through like a smiling angel. It'll come through like a screaming demon and scare the hell out of us. Do we have the courage to give ourselves to what we're asking for? And most of us don't even have the courage to ask for it. What we want instead is comfort, most of us. Do we ask for it? Do we constantly ask for it? Are we like that person who kept asking Ramakrishna, how do I find God? And when he put his head under the water. I think, it's important to keep that conversation open and ask for what we want. If we just want, a house in the country and a beautiful partner, that's not a whole lot, that's not there's not much there, because what it will leave us is empty. But how many of us are asking for our birthright to awaken to who we are fully as a human being on this planet? It's our birthright. It's nothing special, and it's nothing new by anyone special. And there are no shortcuts. Right where we are, best seat in the house. Where do you go from there? It's right there. That hard thing that we're looking at, that scary thing, it's right there.
Do you mentioned that you have a dormitory at your place? Do you see yourself as a mentor to people or a teacher? What do you see your role as, or is it just whatever happens?
I'm open to what happens, and I don't mean to sound wishy-washy about that. I don't see myself. Who isn't a teacher? Who isn't? If you're a burglar, you're going to share your craft with with your fellow burglar. Who's not a teacher? I think who we are, the world will ask it of us, and the more we have to offer, the more people will come for that who resonate with what it is we're selling, in a sense. What it is that we are about. People will end up in your life asking for that. Even in the form, like I said earlier, about projection. People will project their fear onto you, and sometimes your teaching comes in staying present with their projection onto you, and what you do with that becomes the teaching. And it's not you as a teacher, it's you surviving the onslaught in a way that turns it into something beautiful, where you don't react. You just stay present and allow that moment to transform into something that neither of you expected. That's not a teacher. A teacher, it's not that deliberate, or it's not that calculated. It's not like some wisdom is being passed on that you are consciously doing. It's more like you're available to what's coming through, what the moment is asking of you, and something gets passed on. And people are attracted to what they need. That's all of us. It's happening for all of us. We're all attracted to what we need. I do my part. I'm very attentive to other people when they come. That's what. But as I am with anything, with everything I do, as much as possible. I realize it's like an Easter egg hunt. I never know where the next moment of inspiration is going to come from. So how could I not pay attention, calling on that inspiration? If it happens with another human being, great. If there's great wisdom that gets passed along, I receive it and remember it myself as much as I might give it to somebody. There's wonderful, the Course in Miracles talks about, remembering. I think when we have encounters with other people where that something else kicks in that makes everyone come more alive, we remember who we are again. And we're always forgetting, it's just the nature of the mind, the nature of embodied life that, it's all gravity, and it's always pulling us down, and so we need to remember, we need to stand again. And in being attentive to the moment, that's where that renewal happens. Again, it goes into the death, and there's the renewal. I live for renewal in whatever form it wants to take. I'm not attached to that form. If it happens in silence, I have a tower. I go out in my tower, and sometimes it happens and there's no one there, and there's nothing going on. I'm there all alone, and something happens. And I'm as grateful for that as when it happens when I'm screaming on the rooftops. I don't care how it happens. I just want to be available to it happening.
If people want to get in touch with you or learn more about what you do, where would they go?
I'm available. People can. I have a website. There's contact information. People are. I stay open to people, but there's no guarantee what you're going to get because I'm not sure myself. A lot of people come to see the art and visit and hang out and talk, and so I'm available. I've left my life open. This has been my life, staying open to what others and what wants to happen. So,
and that's really remarkable to me, how you've done that. I was curious, are there any books that you tend to recommend for people if they're interested in this line of questioning or interested in exploring the self?
Well, I have books that were important to me, but one of the fascinating things about books, I see some people are just drawn to a book. I mean, sometimes, as you know, a book will jump off the shelf at you, and you get totally lost in it. And other times, like I've recommended books, and some people just aren't at all interested. But I have books, certainly A Course in Miracles. When they first came out, they were in like Xerox form. I mean, I read The Course in Miracles really early on, and they were really important. I mean, I was so driven as a painter, I stopped painting for a month, and all I did was read A Course in Miracles. So, but somebody else will pick them up and they would be meaningless. They won't do it. So, of course, Lao Tzu, I mean, people, Yogananda, I think when we're drawn to, teachers are important. So I guess I better backtrack a little bit on that. It's important to see a template for awakening by reading about others who have done it in their own way. But our way will not be the same. And if we try to copy somebody else's way, it won't work for us. But what we can get is we can see the courage it took for others to follow their path. I mean, Carl Jung, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, radical book. I mean, whatever, those are books that had huge influence on me. But I don't know they're going to do that for others. But I think it's very important if a book calls to us, that we should, and we won't be able to do otherwise. That's what's so wonderful. But there are plenty of wonderful books out there, great wisdom traditions that we can draw from, that will give us a rough sketch of what we need to do. And hopefully the courage to do it, and the inspiration, because there's incredible beauty in becoming who we are. But who we are is not going to look like anything anyone else knows a whole lot about.
Are there any films that you feel like capture, if you will, some of this, perhaps some of the feeling of the creative life, or these moments of holy defeat?
Paris, Texas. I love that film.
Okay.
I just loved it. But because it's very personal too, but to me, that's a transformational film. It's like, he literally goes out into the desert and almost dies, and then there's this whole healing that comes. And I think there's a good example of someone who, got passionately involved in what he believed in, which was, a relationship with a woman, so much so that he lost himself. That in itself became a false god. And then he had to accept that holy defeat where he walks out into the desert and then comes back, and then the healing happens by way of two people telling their stories. It's a fascinating, powerful film.
Well, I actually don't have any more questions. I feel like this interview or your answers, I should say, are really packed with a sense of what you're trying to communicate. I hope that other people can pick up on that, but at least on my end, there's a really deep feeling to your answers, that you're a person who very much is living and has lived what you're talking about, as opposed to someone who's read a whole bunch and has thought a whole lot about things.
I'm always fascinated by people who get what they need with intellectual pursuit, but so I see that it's possible. Whatever our nature, I think we need to follow that, and it's different for each of us. But I appreciate what you said, and I thank you for it.
Great. I will make sure that on the show notes that I link to your site, and I will link to your book as well, so people will be able to find that easily. And I thank you. This has been very enjoyable and a very worthwhile experience for me.
And me